Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Robbie Rhino and also welcome back to a brand new season of World of Tanks console. The Soldiers of Fortune season started today on the 26th of September, and in today's video I'll be giving you a full review of the level 100 season pass reward tank for this brand new Soldiers of Fortune season. And if we scroll on down here, we'll be able to see what the tank in question is. It's this tank here. It's called the Bandit. It's a Cold War Independent Alliance Era 2 medium tank, and this is the artwork that World of Tanks console have put up on the website. It looks like it's got a pretty funky skin, a turret similar to something like a T-72AV, pretty large hull, but yeah, a nice large caliber gun there from what it looks like in the artwork. So we're going to head over to Excel. We're going to look at the stats of the Bandit here on the left, and we're going to be comparing to three other vehicles in this comparison. Two of them are medium tanks. They're both premium tanks. The Armour, which was recently released with the Iron Maiden collaboration, and also the T62M1. And I've also got the stats of the Chieftain Hybrid 120, and albeit this is a heavy tank, but it does play a sort of heavium role on the battlefield. So I haven't actually included that in the color coding stats that we're going to be comparing, but I've sort of put some indications here of how good this heavy tank is compared to these medium tanks to see whether you want to pick up this tank at level 100, whether you feel like the season pass is worth it. So we're going to start by having a look at the stats of the Bandit comparing to these other tanks. Then we're going to have a look at the armor profile of the Bandit in the garage, and then we will get stuck into some gameplay for you where I will talk about my commander and equipment setup, and I'll show you how that affects the stats in the first gameplay of today's video. So if you haven't seen my reviews before, in terms of the color coding, red is the worst stat, orange is somewhere in between, and green is the best. And yeah, we're going to start with the silver bonus, XP bonus, and commander XP bonus, as the Bandit, the Armour, and the T62M1 are premium tanks, as well as the Chieftain Hybrid 120, but of course we're just kind of given that as a reference to these other vehicles. So in terms of the silver bonus, the Bandit has 65%, which is the joint best, better than the Armour and also better than the Chieftain Hybrid 120. So if you do well in this tank, you'll be making a lot of silver. In terms of the XP bonus, 10%, which is the joint lowest with the T62M1, but you know, a little bit of a boost in terms of your XP, the highest being the Armour and the Chieftain Hybrid 120. And in terms of commander XP, you have 10%, which again is the joint lowest, but not by a long margin. You have 15% on the Armour, 5% more, and it's the same as the Hybrid 120, so you'll be making some advancements with your Command XP there. And now we're going to get stuck into the raw skills of this vehicle, starting with the hit points. And as an Era 2 medium tank, it's got 2,600, which is getting up towards the higher levels of Era 2 in terms of the hit point level, but as you can see, it's the worst in this comparison. Only 50 less than the Armour, and it's 100 less than the 62M1, and of course the Chieftain Hybrid 120 is going to be out on top there with higher hit points as it's designated a heavy tank. So you don't have a massive amount of hit points, but more than enough to take a few rounds. And we're going to have a look at the armor later, but I'll tell you now that it's not going to be very easy to bounce a lot of shells in the Bandit. You're going to have to sort of rely on your mobility and your gun to get you through the battles. Next, in terms of the view range, 495 meters. Better than the Armour, slightly worse than the T62M1, and slightly better than the Hybrid 120. And if you apply your commander and equipment setup, and if you've got a 9-skill commander, you'll be getting that up to a very decent level, and you should be able to spot relatively well for yourself as a medium tank. And just a passing mention to the steel concealment, it's 336 meters, which actually isn't too bad for a medium tank in Era 2. So if you wanted to add some concealment perks, you could, although you're quite large, and with the True Vision system, I don't think that it would be worth it. Next, in terms of the mobility, a lot of this is highlighted in green, which means it has fantastic mobility, which is great news for a medium tank. You have a 950 horsepower engine, the same as the Armour, better than the T62M1, and only a little bit worse than the Hybrid 120, but that has some armour and is a heavier tank in general. In terms of the power to weight on the Bandit, 22.37, which is the best in this comparison. Very quick at getting going, and that's going to help you up hills as well. You also have the best top forward speed at 70.6 kilometers an hour, better than the AMOLAD, much better than the T62M1, and it's also better than the Hybrid 120. In terms of your reverse speed, this is the only stat in terms of its mobility where you don't have the best, but it's only beaten by the AMOLAD by a little bit. And in terms of the T62M1, it blows it out of the water, and it's much quicker than the Hybrid 120 going backwards. In terms of the hull traverse, again, fantastic news for the Bandit. 50 degrees a second. You can move your hull very quickly to get your armour and also get your gun around on your targets. Much, much better than all of the other tanks in this comparison. And you also have best-in-class turret traverse at 36 degrees a second. And with gun handling skills on your commander, this will improve this figure to a very, very nice level. So you can snap your hull, snap your turret around, get your armour front-facing, and also get your gun around on your opponents. Much better than the other tanks in this comparison, barring the Hybrid 120, 2 degrees a second more. But yeah, still pretty damn good. In terms of the firepower then, so this is obviously where it's going to hopefully get interesting for the Bandit. You have a 125mm caliber gun. The AMOLAD in this comparison has a 120, T62M1 115, and the Hybrid 120 a 120mm caliber gun. So the Bandit has the highest caliber gun in this comparison. In terms of your rounds, you have 3 flavours of ammunition. You have APF SDS rounds as your standard rounds, heat rounds as your secondary or premium ammunition selection, and you have HE rounds as your third ammunition choice. In terms of your alpha damage on your standard and premium, 550 damage, so that's the highest in this comparison, even better than the 530 on the Hybrid 120. In terms of your HE rounds, if you do manage to penetrate, 690 damage on those ones, and it's only beaten by the ATGMs on the T62M1, and that's the only tank that has ATGMs, and that's instead of the HE rounds on the other tanks in this comparison, or the HESH rounds in this comparison. In terms of your standard rounds on the Bandit, APF SDS 1785 meters a second shell velocity, which is the best in this comparison, beating all of these tanks. So fantastic at sniping at mid to long ranges. You don't have to give too much lead in comparison to the other tanks. Just bear in mind you will lose penetration over distance. In terms of the shell velocity on your heat rounds, 905 meters a second, which is going to pale in comparison to the premium of the AMOLAD, as they are APF SDS. It's a little bit worse than the heat rounds on the T62M1, and it's much slower than the Hybrid 120's APF SDS premium rounds. However, heat rounds are very, very hard to use in Era 2 because of all the composite explosive reactive armor, and yeah, I highly recommend that you don't carry many, if any, of those heat rounds, so it kind of doesn't really matter too much. And in terms of the shell velocity on the HE rounds, 820 meters a second, much better than the HESH rounds on the AMOLAD. ATGM is going to beat the shell velocity on the T62M1's ATGMs, and it's also faster than the HESH rounds on the Hybrid 120. However, the Hybrid 120 does have fantastic penetration HESH rounds. And now we're going to get on to the penetration, and this is the sort of low point of this firepower, in my opinion, on the Bandit. On your standard rounds, which is pretty much all I'm going to be carrying in my gameplay, 408mm of penetration. It's going to struggle against the thickest armor in Era 2, and for a free-to-play player, that's going to be very annoying. If you don't like firing many premium rounds, and heat's quite hard to use, as I've just explained, that can be a little bit of an issue. So you're going to have to learn the weak spots, and you're going to have to get those crossfires, find the rear and the sides of your enemy. You can see here that the AMOLAD has 10mm more penetration, T62M1 much more at 427, and the Hybrid 120, which is kind of the best tank in this comparison in my opinion, has 418. So you're going to struggle a little bit in terms of your standard penetration, and if you do load those heat rounds and you want to try and make them work, 420mm of penetration. It's again not as good as the heat rounds on the T62M1, which has 440. It's much worse than the AMOLAD's premium rounds and also the Hybrid 120's premium rounds, as that is essentially the same gun anyway, 483mm. A little bit disappointing there. And also your HE rounds, although you can definitely make 145mm of penetration work for that 690 alpha damage, it's much less than the pen on the Hesh rounds on the ArmourLad and the Hybrid 120, which has 290, and those ATGMs have 550mm of penetration on the T62M1. So again, you're just going to be trying to make mostly those APF SDS rounds work. It's very good for sniping, but penetrating at distances is going to be hard with that poor penetration. You're definitely going to have to try and find the sides and rear of the enemy tank. But when you do hit hard with the best in class alpha damage. Next, in terms of the aim time, you can see here 2.3 seconds on the Bandit, which is the worst in this comparison. Chieftain Hybrid 120 has God tier aim time, and the ArmourLad just a little bit behind that at 1.8 seconds. And you are 0.2 seconds worse than the T62M1, which is kind of notorious for having relatively poor gun handling compared to some other medium tanks. It doesn't get much better in terms of your accuracy. It's the worst in this comparison by a long way, again 0.35, much worse than the Hybrid 120 and the ArmourLad, and it's also worse than the T62M1, so you're going to have to invest heavily in your commander and equipment setup to try and improve the gun handling of this vehicle. In terms of the DPM, it's not actually the worst in this comparison, which is a little bit of good news in terms of this gun handling and DPM for the Bandit. However, it's not fantastic. You only beat the T62M1 by a little bit, and you're miles off what the ArmourLad and the Hybrid 120 are in terms of the DPM. So don't get into brawls where you are trading one for one, because other tanks are going to be putting multiple rounds, is what I mean. Don't get into those brawls where you know you're going to be taking multiple rounds and you don't have the firepower to fight back. You want to get into those situations where you're fighting sort of one shot for one shot and you're able to sit and reload behind cover, because then you can use your higher alpha damage advantage. In terms of the reload for one shell, 9.8 seconds, which is the longest in this comparison. However, you do have the highest alpha damage. In terms of ammo capacity, 44 rounds, which is more than enough with this DPM for most battles you're going to be coming into. However, you do have slightly more than the T62M1, but not as much as the ArmourLad and Hybrid 120. Lastly, in terms of the gun depression and elevation, you have 6 degrees of gun depression, which is the same as the ArmourLad, which is the joint best in this comparison in terms of the medium tanks, but the Hybrid 120 has 10 degrees, which is much more flexible on ridgelines. However, you do beat things like the T62M1 with a horrific 3 degrees, so you can use it on some ridgelines, but it will struggle on those taller ridgelines, so definitely watch out for that. And you don't want to expose too much of this tank, because you will get butchered, because the armour, as we're going to come on to in a minute, isn't too great. And lastly, in terms of the gun elevation, 14 degrees. It's the joint worst in this comparison, worse than the T62M1 and much worse than the Hybrid 120. So yeah, it's just kind of up and down in terms of the stats for the Bandit. You have great silver bonus at 65%, best in class mobility. In terms of your firepower, you have the best in class alpha damage, but you have very disappointing penetration. You don't have a premium APF SDS option. You have to try and either make heat work or use HE as well. In terms of the shell velocity, great for actually hitting your target, but penetrating with that penetration can be a little bit of an issue. And in terms of the firepower, not great news really. You're going to want to do everything you can to improve your gun handling and your DPM. However, you can make that 6 degrees of gun depression work. So that's it for the stat comparison of the Bandit. What I'm going to do now is load up my garage. We're going to have a look at the armor viewer of the Bandit, and then we're going to get stuck into the first gameplay of today's video, where I'll talk about my commander and equipment setup, how that affects the stats of the Bandit, and then we can see how this tank performs on the battlefield. So I'll catch you over in the garage in just a second. So here we are in the garage having a look at the armour viewer of the Bandit. We're going to go through the different armoured plates of this vehicle from the thickest down to the thinnest, and I'll tell you how to take them out on the battlefield if you come up against these things, and also how to try and play this vehicle effectively to reduce the amount of damage that you are taking from your opponents. So the thickest part of the armour on this turret is 290mm on this band on top of the turret, as you can see. In terms of the mantlet, 280mm, and although that's not massively thick, it's slightly rounded and there are different sections to the left and right which are curved, so hopefully that will be able to bounce some lower penetration rounds. However, it's not looking too great for the Bandit at the moment in terms of the armour. You have these sections here, 260mm to the rear left and rear right of the turret, and also behind the cupola. And the sections to the left and right of the mantlet from the front, when you're looking at this vehicle, are 235mm of armour. They are rounded, as you can see, so at an angle you might get some weird ricochet, but from the front, the closer you shoot to the mantlet with the higher penetration, you can just go straight through this turret, which is a little bit disappointing. I was hoping that this turret would be a lot more durable on the battlefield. There are sections behind this which we'll have a look at in just a second. In terms of the bit just below the cupola, 150mm, and this is quite large, and you can see it even when this thing is using the full extent of its 6 degrees of gun depression, so very easy to penetrate there all the way around this vehicle. And then sort of to the rear right of this turret, another 150mm section. The actual rear of the turret behind the spaced armour section is 120mm, so not very thick at all. And then you have two other sections at 110mm. The cupola itself, 100mm, easy to see and a pretty easy shot for most accuracy levels in Era 2 on the different tanks, so definitely watch out for that, keep moving and try and avoid people shooting you there. And in terms of the left and right of the mantlet, the actual base thickness of the turret, 90mm, and you're adding that onto the 235, so low penetration rounds might struggle. Something like the Bandit might struggle to go through the front of this turret, especially at distance and at an angle. However, it's going to struggle against most penetration in Era 2. It might do well against light tanks, autocannons, things like that, but better penetration is just going to go straight through the front of your turret. The upper hull's not much better, 70mm. It is sloped upwards, as you can see, so at extreme angles like this you can get some auto ricochet angles, but dead on from the front, a very easy penetration. And a lot of tanks are going to be higher than this vehicle and they're going to be able to shoot down on your hull, so if you're face hugging this thing you can just go straight through the upper hull of this vehicle. Just this section here, not the bit above it, which is sort of the engine deck. If you're shooting this bit on it, you can go through from above it. In terms of the gun, 55mm, the lower plate is 50mm. Again, some very, very extreme angles like this, you can get some weird ricochets, but more often than not, people are just going to absolutely butcher this. And there's no spaced armour on the front of the hull or lower plate, so ATGMs can just go straight through the front of this and have a field day. And then you have these two corner sections here, above the tracks at the left and right at 50mm. So when this thing's trying to side scrape, which it can't do very well anyway, because we're going to see the side armour in a minute, you can just go straight through this. Even with some autocannon with high rounds, you can go through this section as well. In terms of the roof deck, 45mm, so it's going to not be overmatched by most guns you're going to see in Era 2. However, ATGMs landing on this can do some devastating damage. You have these sections of side armour here at 35mm towards the side, so even when you're side scraping and you're trying to use this section here, if they shoot here, I'll just work out what caliber gun they need to be able to go through this, so it'll be 35 times 3 plus 1. You need a 106mm caliber gun or higher to overmatch this section, and lots of guns are like that in Era 2, so definitely watch out for that. And it's a large shot, and as you can see it does raise us up, and from the side it's an easy shot as well, so not very thick there indeed. You do have some sort of spaced armour on the sides there covering the tracks, so don't shoot here with ATGMs. Either shoot to the front or the rear of this vehicle, go for the engine deck, that big boxy bit, or just side of the turret, or go round to the rear or the front and you'll be able to go through. The actual sides of the armour sort of behind the tracks are 30mm, which means that when you're side scraping, if people are shooting the side armour which is behind your tracks, they only need a 91mm caliber gun or higher to overmatch, so it can't even side scrape very well at all, apart from against auto cannons. Yeah, and it's becoming very, very disappointing in terms of the armour for the Bandit. 25mm of big juicy rear armour for ATGMs, HE and Hesh rounds to go through, and there you do have 20mm of engine deck armour there, and the tracks count as 20mm of spaced armour, and you do have another section 20mm on top of the roof, and that's pretty much all she wrote for this vehicle. Very disappointing indeed. The only chance you've got of blocking ATGMs is if they probably either hit your mantlet and low roll, or they hit the side of your vehicle at an angle on the spaced armor sections. Apart from that, they can go straight through the lower plate and upper plate, and pretty much most of the rear third of this vehicle and the front part as well. You can also get tracked and penetrated from the side towards the rear drive wheel and the front drive wheel, so definitely watch out for that. So yeah, all in all, a little bit disappointing for the Bandit. Just don't get hit is my advice to you. Try and get ridge lines which you can use 6 degrees, only expose your turret if you can, keep moving to avoid people shooting your cupola, and yeah, angle as much as possible, and hopefully you'll get auto ricochet angles. But yeah, use your mobility, use your slightly superior sort of concealment against some other heavy tanks to try and stay hidden, although with true vision that's almost impossible. And yeah, just use your alpha damage to overcome your opponents with your mobility, get crossfires, and don't be a brawler in this vehicle because you won't last very long. But that's it for the armor of the Bandit. We're now going to head on into the first gameplay of today's video. We're going to talk about my commander and equipment setup, how that affects the stats, then we'll talk about how this thing performs on the battlefield. So I'll see you over in the first gameplay in just a second. So here we are in the first gameplay of today's video. We are here in the Bandit on Raseiniai, and whilst I'm making my way into position pretty quickly with this good mobility, I'll talk you through my equipment and my commander setup, how that's affected some of the stats of the Bandit, and then we'll get talking about this gameplay and then the next two that follow. So in terms of my equipment, I've chosen to run the improved ventilation, advanced loader, and the gun stabilizer. And in terms of my command skills, I'm running 6th Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Armour Angling, Track Mechanic, and Off-Road Driving. So in terms of the commander skills, 6th Sense and Born Leader is standard on all of my commanders, as well as Rapid Loading to help the DPM, 3 gun handling skills, and you could take out the Armour Angling for run and gun to make it better on the move in terms of its accuracy. I run Armour Angling because I use this commander on some heavy tanks or main battle tanks as well. Track Mechanic because you don't have any whole armour that is effective, so you want to try and get out of harm's way if you get tracked in the open, and Off-Road Driving to give it a little bit of a speed boost. And in terms of my equipment, I've chosen to run the Advanced Loader to improve the DPM, which is already pretty nice for a 125mm caliber gun, Gun Stabilizer to improve the accuracy, and Ventilation to improve everything about the tank. You definitely could use something like the Advanced Powertrain on Traction System to further improve the mobility, but I think investing in this gun is the best thing you can do, as it is the best thing about this tank. So how has that changed some of the stats of the Bandit? Well, in terms of my view range, it's gone from 495 meters to 526 meters. And in terms of my turret traverse, it's gone from 36 degrees a second to 42.73 degrees a second. And in terms of my gun handling, aim time's dropped from 2.3 to 2.16 seconds, and accuracy has dropped from 0.35 to 0.29, but it can still feel a little bit derpy sometimes. In terms of the DPM, it's gone from 3,366 to 4,499, which means I now reload, instead of a base 9.8 seconds, I reload in 7.33 seconds. So that's how my setup has changed the stats of the Bandit, and I feel like this works pretty well for me. However, it's just a recommendation, and you can definitely tweak it to your liking. So here in this first gameplay on Raseiniai, we've got ourselves stuck between a rock and a hard place, quite literally. We're down to 1,049 hit points. We've picked up quite a bit of damage so far, and we have also picked up a kill with that kill on the object 934. We're just trying to help our light tank clear out the other light tanks on this team, and hopefully we can put some vision out towards the castle area and also get some more damaging shots in. I'm now down to 162 hit points, so I've got to be really careful, and it's a really good indication, this kind of gameplay, of what you can expect in the Bandit. This first gameplay is a very typical game I was having. You can definitely get some pretty decent damage out with the nice alpha damage that this 125mm caliber gun has. 550 alpha damage with your standard APF SDS or your premium heat, and if you do load those HE rounds, you'll be looking at 145mm of penetration for 690 damage. So it's pretty good damage dealing. However, the armor really does let this thing down. You can bounce occasionally off of the turret, as I believe it's the T-72AV's turret, and it's the Leopard 1A5's hull, I believe. So yeah, not a fantastic hull. You can't really side scrape because it's only 30mm of side armor, and yeah, you've really got to rely on your gun to get you out of a jam. So there on Raseiniai, unfortunately, we did pop our smoke, which I carry with a large med and large repair kit. However, yeah, we were sat in the same position, but I felt like I couldn't move and we get taken out. It's still a pretty close game. However, it's going to go downhill pretty rapidly from here. So what I'm going to do is pause the gameplay. We're going to skip to the end and then see how the team did. So unfortunately our team couldn't take that one down, and it ends in a defeat for our first gameplay in the Bandit. We finished second on our team, 5.8k direct damage, 1399 assistance, 1 kill, decent profit without or with a premium account, and this kind of damage result or combined damage result is very usual for this tank. I've been having that kind of result quite often. It can be quite hard to influence the battle as much as you'd wish to, however it can still put out some decent damage. We're now going to head on into the second gameplay, which is much better than this one, and then we will head on into the third and wrap up this video. So I'll see you over in the second gameplay in just a second. So we are now into the second gameplay of today's video, and we are here in the Bandit on Nomonhan. We've spawned in the southwest of the map, and we're going to race our way down the 1 and 2 line into position on the hills in front of us and try and get this 6 degrees of gun depression to work. So that 6 degrees is probably one of the worst aspects of this tank, alongside the lack of hull armor or any really effective armor over the whole of the tank. 6 degrees is quite hard to use on a lot of the maps, especially ones like Redshire or Nomonhan, where there are ridge lines where it'd be more viable to use 9 degrees or 10 degrees. So sometimes you do have to find these smaller ridge lines to be able to position yourself to get shots across, make use of bushes and trees. Even though your concealment isn't fantastic, it's still good enough at this kind of range to be able to shoot and not get spotted. You can pull back fairly quickly with a pretty decent reverse speed of 32.4 kilometers an hour, and you can definitely get into good positions because you can go 70.6 kilometers an hour forwards with a great power to weight of 22.37. And as you can see, when you do get your gun firing, when you let it aim in, it does some nice work. Nice alpha damage. The DPM is pretty good. We've boosted ours to 4,499, and it really is kind of a secondary support kind of gameplay. You don't want to be right on the front lines brawling because you will get taken out because of the lack of armor. You can't play that kind of ridgeline game with tanks that have turret armor. You've got to be second line supporting your main battle tank, supporting what your light tanks and other medium tanks are spotting, and then later on in the battle you can go in and you can trade your hit points because you've got 2,600, and you definitely need all of them if you're going to be trading, because yeah, you're not going to be bouncing many, if any, shots at all. So here in this game on Nomonhan, we've set up in this E2 location, watching out towards the north. We picked up 2.7k direct damage, 231 assistance, and we're just sniping. And you can see that the great shell velocity this gun has with its APF SDS rounds, 1785 meters a second, is really, really nice. Yeah, the only other downside to this gun is the fact that sometimes it can be a little bit derpy. With our setup, we've still got only 0.29 accuracy, and the aim time is 2.16 seconds, and also the penetration at 408mm on your standard rounds can struggle against things like the FE4-11 and some of the stronger tanks like this T55 Enigma. However, we do have his side, so we can put round after round into him, and we're just going to wait, try and take him out, then we're going to relocate as we are coming under fire. So unfortunately, this gun, this 125mm caliber gun, doesn't have premium APF SDS. If it did, I think it would take it up to another level. You do have heat rounds with 420mm of penetration, but heat is so difficult to use, and it doesn't go through all of the composite explosive reactive armor, all of that spaced armor in Cold War that protects against ATGMs, and it also protects against the heat rounds. So I don't take any heat at all. As you can see, I carry full standard ammunition ammunition. You definitely could take between sort of 2 and 5 rounds of HE for the light tanks, because it would boost your alpha damage up dramatically to that 690 damage. However, the DPM is pretty good, and you only carry, I believe, 44 rounds into every battle. So yeah, you definitely can run out, and I just checked, that is the correct 44 rounds. So if you're not careful and you do waste quite a lot of shells in more drawn out battles, you can definitely run out during the gameplay. But we've done our sniping job, we have taken some damage. We're going to try and push forward, use our hit points now, and trade the rest of them to get the extra damage and hopefully finish this game with a win. You saw there I tried to fire on the move and it was a bit derpy, which is why you probably could take out the armor angling for the run and gun skill on your commander. It will be better on the move. But yeah, this is how you play the Bandit. You support at the start, then later on, hopefully whilst you have whittled the enemy down, you can go in, trade your hit points, use your mobility against some of the slower tanks like we are doing against this MOBA. Although it's not particularly slow, we are able to evade a shot there and get behind hard cover, and then he will turn his attention to the medium tank that is behind him. We pop out from the rock and we get the final kill in this game for our 4th kill. 6.1k direct damage there on Nomonhan. We finish in the MVP slot, and we have a pretty decent game with 1.7k assistance. We block 430, which we got very lucky there. Another sniper medal showing this gun, when you let it aim in, is pretty consistent, 1449 base XP, and we also make a nice profit without and with a premium account as well. So that's it for the second gameplay. 4 minutes and 39 seconds, fast as usual in Cold War and World of Tanks console in general. Now we're going to head on into the third and final gameplay. So we are now into the third and final gameplay of today's video, and we are here on Dukla Pass in the Bandit, and we're going to make use of our good mobility, get into a position where we could get some vision and hopefully some damage towards the north of this map. And you do have to be quite passive at the start of your games because of that lack of hull armor and even the lack of turret armor really. And if you get caught out, you can struggle really badly. One thing to know about the 125mm gun is that you don't get 6 degrees of gun depression over the back. As you can see, as it's the Leopard 1A5's hull, it only has around sort of 3 or 2 degrees, I believe. So when you are running away from someone and you want to fire at them, you're going to have to either expose your side in order to be able to get your gun down far enough to be able to shoot them, or you are just going to have to try and find cover as quickly as possible. We are just watching this Sheridan be a complete ass to the medium tank, and yeah, as we stare him down, he does go off, and hopefully he's going to do his light tank thing. We're going to set up here in F4 and we're going to try and get some sniping shots to start this game towards the north of the map, and then when we get a good lay of the land, we are going to turn round as we notice the whole glut of enemies making their way down the south towards our base. So we're going to set up in a defensive location here in F3, which is a good position for defending our base. We're just going to let them come around this rock into the open, and hopefully we can use the hard cover to try and avoid fire and make our 125mm caliber gun sing. Unfortunately there we didn't let it fully aim in. It's a very good gun for sniping at these kinds of distances because you do have that 1785 meters a second shell velocity. However, it still will miss some shots because of the sort of derpy nature. It's a higher caliber gun. With our setup only down to 0.29, you could use combat rations instead of the smoke screen. However, I would recommend using the smoke screen to cover your vehicle from incoming ATGMs and also trying to escape because of your lack of armor. So we finally managed to get a little bit of damage, 1000 damage so far, and when you do hit, you really chunk them down with that 550 alpha damage. And if I did have HE rounds loaded here, I could have taken that BMP one out with one shot with that 690 alpha damage on those HE rounds. And now we're going to push forward and help out our friendly medium. The Magak 5 is running away, and we're going to put some nice rounds into the rear of that vehicle. One thing to note with this 125mm is that the module damage is quite nice on every round. 175 hit points worth of module damage, so you can set quite a lot of fires and some ammo racks with this vehicle. And as you're going to see here, you do weigh a substantial amount, so you are able to ram some lighter targets to either finish them off or to deal some substantial damage. You will take some damage in return, but as you can see, the mobility is pretty nice. We managed to reverse out of that situation, and we do manage to pick up our second kill there. And now we're just going to poke round and use this gun to really chunk the enemy down. And when you do hit, as long as you hit consistently, you do some nice damage. You don't want to get into a fight where you're just trading your DPM, because tanks do have better DPM than this tank. You want to be able to put one in, fall back down off a ridge or fall into hard cover, and then put another one in. And if you're trading one for one, you'll usually come out on top with a lot of main battle tank or medium tanks, because their alpha damage is usually below 550. So definitely use your alpha damage to your advantage. In this particular game here on Dukla Pass, we take out the M113, pretty sneaky tank destroyer there, and now we can turn our attention to the tanks that are in the north of the map. It's 4 tanks versus 4 tanks, so a very close game. We're getting some nice vision there on that M60A2, but we do take a shot from the WZ122. We want to get out of the way of that tank as quickly as possible, because it can pen us, like everything can, but also it has some nasty ATGMs, and with the multiple weapon system, yeah, we're not long for this world if we sit out in front of a tank like that. So we're going to put one in, return fire, and then we're going to advance when we feel like we have the opportunity. 2 medium tanks are following me, and at this moment I feel like I screwed up a little bit, because the medium tank in front of me has been taken out. So I'm asking for help from the medium tanks. Hopefully they can cover me, and I was hoping to get up here and surprise that WZ122. Unfortunately, we get spotted by the other WZ122, so I fake like I'm going round to the north, and then I'm going to turn back on myself and hopefully catch this other WZ122 in the side, or as he's trying to escape. BMP2's coming after us, so we're going to put one shot into him. Unfortunately, it just hits the track, so we're going to pop our smoke, and that will hopefully allow us to get out of harm's way. Our friendly medium tanks are supporting us, and fortunately we get the rear of this WZ122. Hit a shot on the move there. It's still relatively accurate, even though it's derpier than some of the other guns. And now we're going to try and put another one into him as he goes into the smoke, and then we are thinking about going to chase him. However, we're going to turn behind the hard cover and try and come in from a different angle. Hopefully he's not expecting us to come in from this angle. The BMP2 gets taken out by a friendlier Leopard. We auto-aim and snap a shot there. I really should have aimed it, and that's caused me a little bit of a dilemma. However, it's now over 2 versus 1, so as long as I bait this WZ around this building, wait for my Leopard to come in and support me, I should be golden. So we're going to use our great mobility here to hide behind this house, distract this WZ122 while our medium tank comes in and hopefully puts a round into him. He does, we follow it up with one, and then the Leopard 1 actually rams the WZ122 with a nice ballsy play there to take this game down. But that's it for the third and final gameplay of today's video. We finish in the MVP slot, good profit without or with a premium account. First class mastery badge, so people are having some pretty epic games as to be expected. 1575 base XP, 3 kills, 7.4k direct damage, 1291 assistance, and we blocked 490 damage. Again, getting pretty lucky with that block. So that's it for the third and final game. It's a pretty decent tank. It's definitely not overpowered. It's very well balanced, a little bit underwhelming. It can be awkward to use with the 6 degrees of gun depression. However, if you find positions to make that work, if you play a more passive sort of supporting role when you're not trying to trade your DPM with someone else, trade 1 for 1 with your high alpha, yeah, and you can have some pretty good games. Just don't expect to bounce anything, especially ATGMs. And if it was the ultimate season pass reward, I'd be a little bit disappointed. However, as you can grind towards it, I think it's definitely worth it, especially for the collectors, and you can make some nice silver with this 65% silver bonus this tank has. So that's it for the review. Please leave a like down below if you think it was entertaining and or helpful, and yeah, leave a comment what you think of this tank. And until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.